in the headlines, bring the nation together through reconciliation. This is what the main opposition party's new leader, Moon Jae-in, called on President Park Geun-hye to do as he headed over to the National Cemetery in Seoul to pay his respects to former presidents. Just a day after North Korea fires 5 short-range missiles into the East Sea, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Antony Blinken meets with his counterpart in Seoul to talk about North Korea's nuclear threats and Korean peninsula issues. Leaders of Russia and Ukraine are expected to meet this week with the goal of drafting a way out of the current crisis in eastern Ukraine since the fighting broke out last April. These stories and more coming right up. It's a cold Monday here in Korea. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Lee Ji-yoon filling in for Eoh Jin-joo this week.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this afternoon, Moon Jae-in, the newly elected leader of Korea's main opposition party, has called on President Park Geun-hye to recognize the past wrongdoings of her father, the late former President Park Geun-hye, saying it would help to bring the nation together.
Yes, and as for dealing with his own party, Moon faces the huge task of leading his party to victory in 2 critical elections, some by-elections this year and the general election next year. Our Kim Young-gil starts us off.
Moon Jae-in was elected the chairman of the New Politics Alliance for Democracy, promising fresh leadership and vowed to bring together a party stricken by deep-rooted factional strife.
From this moment on, our party will renounce lethargy and factional divisions. We will move forward through change and unity, defend democracy, and work to boost the economy. I, Moon Jae-in, will reward the party by leading it to victory in the general election next year.
Moon overtook rival candidates Park Ji-won and Lee Ji-yoon. He inherits the post from the interim leader Moon Hee-sang. The chairmanship has been vacant since co-leaders Kim Han-gil and An Chol-soo stepped down in July. The country's largest opposition group has seen its popularity drop since the by-elections in July due to an overwhelming defeat by the ruling Saenuri party. Since the drubbing, the party has failed to present a clear vision of its goals, grappling instead with internal feuds. 5 Supreme Council members were elected at the party convention on Sunday. They and Moon are tasked with leading the party to an upcoming by-election in April and the general election next year. The new leadership was elected through spot polls of party representatives and opinion polls of party members and the general public. The party also adopted a revised version of its constitution which stipulates the rules for nominating candidates for the general election. With a new leader in place, the party now faces the challenge of regaining the public trust and presenting a vision for the party in the future. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, President Park Geun-hye plans to carry out a small cabinet reshuffle in the coming days. The presidential office says the shakeup will come shortly after the president's prime minister nominee is officially appointed this week. But now there's concerns that President Park's pick, Eoh Jin-joo, could be in for a rough ride as he's been accused for trying to influence reports suggesting that he might not be fit for the job. Our Choi Yoo-sun has more on this story.
President Park's decision to complete reshuffles after her prime minister nominee is approved by parliament shows she plans to take into account both the public and ruling party sentiments. According to the presidential office spokesperson, the shakeups now expected after the parliament votes on the prime minister nominee on Thursday will be limited. While Yoo Gi-jun, a ruling party lawmaker close to the president, is a widely talked about candidate for Oceans Minister, the Unification Minister is also speculated to be replaced. But the future of Prime Minister nominee Eoh Jin-joo is uncertain after local media reported an audio file of the nominee claiming to have blocked media coverage questioning his eligibility as Prime Minister.
We had not expected this. Since the appointment will be about the nominee's qualifications, we need to come together to overcome this hurdle.
Lee also faces a series of allegations, including real estate speculation and his son having sought military service exemption by having a knee surgery.
The nominee has failed to clarify any of the allegations made against him, and now we've seen his crooked way of thinking that he can control the media. The nominee is not qualified to be appointed prime minister.
If Lee fails to win parliamentary approval, it will deal a heavy blow to the Park administration as it seeks to focus on revitalizing the economy entering its third year. And the presidential office's relationship with the ruling party, which has called for reforms in the administration, will also depend on whether the presidential chief of staff will be dismissed and who will be named as the president's new political advisors. 최유선, Arirang News.
The United States is urging North Korea to halt all threats and take steps to denuclearize. This after Pyongyang fired 5 short-range missiles into the East Sea on Sunday in a move to protest against upcoming joint military exercises between the US and South Korea. Seoul's defense ministry says the missiles were fired off North Korea's east coast and flew about 200 kilometers before falling down into the sea. Under the UN Security Council resolutions on Pyongyang, North Korea is banned from launching longer-range missiles, but not short-ranged ones like these. The US State Department emphasized that the joint military exercises coming up in March have been ongoing for the past 40 years, and they are transparent and purely defensive in nature. Meanwhile, senior diplomats from South Korea and the United States have been holding talks in Seoul on this Monday. Seoul's foreign ministry says US Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken and South Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister Jo Tae-yong exchanged views on a wide range of issues, including North Korea. The talks come less than 24 hours after North Korea test-fired those short-range missiles off its east coast, of course, heightening tensions on the Korean peninsula. This is the third visit to Seoul by a high-level US diplomat in recent weeks. Blinken heads to Beijing on Tuesday and plans to make a stop in Tokyo before returning to Washington.
Well, the U.S. government has also moved to support a group of American historians protesting Japan's attempt to change a history text. This move is also expected to pressure Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe during his upcoming trip to the U.S. this spring. With more, here's our Connie Kim.
The U.S. government has lent its support to a group of U.S. historians who have been protesting Japan's attempts to whitewash history. The State Department said Sunday that it strongly supports academic freedom as part of the foundation of a democratic society. It urged Tokyo to approach its historical wrongdoing through healing and reconciliation. Now, this comes after a group of 19 historians issued a joint statement expressing opposition to Japan's efforts to pressure U.S. publisher McGraw-Hill to change how the sexual slavery issue is described in one of its textbooks. Historians estimate that 200,000 women, mostly Koreans, were forced by the Japanese army to serve in military brothels during World War II. A collective statement by history scholars is seen as unusual, and it's expected to put pressure on Abe during his upcoming trip to the U.S. this spring. The trip will be Abe's first U.S. visit in about 2 years, and experts say he'll try to use it as an opportunity to deepen Tokyo's alliance with Washington. Abe also wants to push ahead with efforts to revise the country's pacifist constitution and give the country the right to collective self-defense, in other words, to allow the Japanese military to aid allies under attack. Experts say another item on Abe's to-do list is to complete the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal that would strengthen Japan-U.S. economic cooperation in the region. But with the U.S. pushing to restore trilateral security cooperation between South Korea and Japan, analysts say it seems that Tokyo will be left with no choice but to address its past wrongdoing in order to move forward with what Japan has on its agenda. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is giving shape to his planned revision of the country's pacifist constitution. His party is planning to finalize a selection of items subject to amendment during the ongoing regular session. It also tried to put the bill to a parliamentary vote in the fall next year. Our Sun Jung-in has more.
The Japanese government is moving forward with its efforts to revise the country's pacifist constitution. Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party's headquarters for the promotion of revision to the constitution is expected to work on its selection of items on the agenda for constitutional amendment during the current regular session of the Diet. They plan to finalize it no later than this fall. The party then plans to submit the constitutional amendment bill at the regular session in January next year. And after the House of Councillors election next summer, they plan to put the bill in motion during the extraordinary session in fall 2016. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says the party will devote all of its energy to gain control of 2/3 of the seats in the House of Councillors election so it can swiftly move from a vote in the Diet to a public referendum in 2 years' time.
We must win the majority of the votes at the public referendum. This is our top priority.
Abe's government also plans to include other items on the agenda for constitutional amendment that are closely related to the people's lives, such as environmental rights and fiscal health, to win more public support. But a tough road lies ahead for Abe and his party, as its coalition partner, New Komeito, is deeply against the move. And according to a recent opinion poll, more than 2/3 of the Japanese public are skeptical about the planned changes. 손정인, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, the average family in Korea has been having a rough time over the last few years, with the economy sputtering along and salaries stagnating. And newly released figures show that for 5 straight years now, the tax burden on Korean households has been rising at a faster pace than household income. The country's corporations, however, paid less tax last year than they did the previous year. Hwang Jae reports.
Data from Statistics Korea shows the monthly average income of a household with more than 2 members stood at around $4,000 in the January to September period last year. That's more than 3.5% higher compared to the same period a year ago. Households' monthly average expenditure on taxes, on the other hand, rose almost 6% to around $140. The trend of households' tax burden increasing at a faster pace than their income have been an ongoing issue since 2010. And because tax expenditures exclude indirect taxes that households pay as they spend money to buy products, the actual tax burden on them is heavier. While national income tax revenues are on the rise, corporate tax revenues are on a downward trend. National income tax revenue rose around 4.5%, while corporate tax revenue dropped 1.3% in 2013 from a year earlier. Experts say conglomerates hanging on to large cash reserves is directly responsible for the sluggish pace of recovery, and the government has to lay out plans to raise workers' income to boost domestic demand. Hwang Jae, Arirang News.
Falling global oil prices are having a negative impact on Korean builders doing business overseas. And as the majority of their business is in the Middle East, the location of many of the world's major oil-producing countries, the pain is likely not over yet. Our Shin Se-min tells us more.
Korean overseas construction business is hurting after seeing its earnings fall for the first time in 4 years. The Bank of Korea says the current account surplus from overseas construction dropped to $17 billion last year, down 16%. It's the first drop since 2010, when earnings fell nearly 18%. The balance of overseas contracts includes the payments that Korean builders have received from the progress made on existing orders from overseas. The decline in revenue is largely attributed to falling global oil prices, as a large portion of Korean construction firms are located in oil-producing countries in the Middle East. Experts say the oil price drop will be a troubling factor for many Korean builders looking for overseas deals, as it is hard to predict how long the current low oil prices will last. Korea's overseas construction industry has seen steady growth since 2010, from nearly $12 billion that year to $20 billion in 2013. The data says that the number had been rising by a yearly average of 20%. Korean builders, however, secured $66 billion in overseas construction projects last year alone, the second highest total in history, but still short of the government's initial target of $70 billion. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The world's stock market capitalization has hit an 11-year high. The Korea Exchange says the global stock market was valued at $63.5 trillion as of the end of 2014. Up nearly 6% from a year earlier. The Asia-Pacific region gained the most at 14%, followed by the Americans. The European region, which also includes the Middle East and Africa, on the other hand, saw its market cap edge down nearly 9%. The Americas accounted for nearly half of the global stock market cap, while the Asia-Pacific region held about a third. Korea's stock market was valued at $1.2 trillion, or about 2% of the world's total market cap. Well, you know, it's been nearly 2 decades since home shopping TV launched here in Korea, and I'm a big fan of it, actually.
Yeah, well, me not so much, but I'm sure it has its merits. But since then, they've become an essential sales outlet for smaller companies, and they've come into their own, really. They have rather unusual formats, globally at least, and a lot of high-demand products. For this week's Industry Insight, here's our Song Ji-sun.
This thread and textile company, founded half a century ago, was once facing a crisis. It was battling cheap Chinese imports while struggling to find a new retail outlet. But now it has transformed itself into a fast fashion producer, and its products are sold on 2 major TV home shopping channels. Its television sales are more than 10 times what it's raised through offline sales.
We are a traditional manufacturing company and couldn't afford all the marketing expenses needed to advertise our products. So we ventured onto home shopping channels that helped us gain wide recognition in a short period of time.
Many small and mid-sized companies like this have turned their products into household names through home shopping channels. There have been many changes in the past 2 decades since home shopping channels first launched in Korea. The channels now offer practically everything under the sun, and the format has also evolved over time.
Korea's home shopping industry has created a unique business model. Unlike the kinds of short infomercials you might see in other countries, Korean home shopping channels manage to keep the viewers watch the shows for a full hour by making them entertaining.
It's not just celebrities advertising the products, but ordinary people testing them with industry professionals. Korea's home shopping format of featuring a single product has also captured viewers overseas, especially in Asia. 4 Korean channels, mostly run by large conglomerates, have entered 10 countries over the past decade. And this leading channel is now seeking to expand its sales overseas to become the world's #1 home shopping distributor by 2020.
We've reduced the risks by entering the market through joint ventures, and we established an international outsourcing company to customize our product line. We also focus on introducing Korean products by smaller companies because it is harder for them to enter foreign markets than larger companies can.
In fact, over 70% of Korean products sold overseas through the channel are by small and mid-sized companies, creating a new Korean wave of products. Government regulators say home shopping companies' move into foreign markets could also help improve market issues here at home, like the high commission taken by the stations.
Expanding their overseas business could improve their profits as domestic market growth is slowing down, whereas foreign markets are just booming. This could also make room for domestic home shopping channels to lower their commission rates, which stand as an entry barrier for small and mid-sized companies.
The government will also launch a new public home shopping channel in the first half that will be solely dedicated to handling the products of small and mid-sized companies in its bid to help startups use home shopping channels to introduce their products. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
All right, time now for a look through the global headlines we're following this Monday lunchtime here in Seoul. For that, we turn to Eunice Kim at the News Center.
Eunice, European leaders have reached a date for talks on resolving the Ukraine crisis diplomatically. And among those who have RSVP'd are Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian leader Petro Poroshenko.
That's right, Mark, and the high-level summit does come after several days of active lobbying by German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President François Hollande, who are seeking a peaceful way out of the 10-month-old crisis. This as Washington is mulling over arming Ukrainian soldiers. Kim Hyun-bin has the details.
A diplomatic push over the weekend to find a peaceful resolution to the Ukraine crisis has produced a summit date. The leaders of Russia, Ukraine, Germany, and France have agreed to meet in Minsk on Wednesday to discuss a potential peace plan and amid ongoing fighting in eastern Ukraine. The four leaders held a telephone conference call on Sunday, 2 days after German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President François Hollande traveled to Moscow for face-to-face talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ukraine President Petro Poroshenko said he was hopeful the meeting would lead to a swift and unconditional ceasefire in eastern Ukraine, where pro-Russian separatists found success in seizing new territory in recent weeks. But President Putin said the talks would only happen if an agreement is reached on a number of points, pointing out that Kiev must halt its military operation in eastern Ukraine and stop putting pressure on rebel-held regions. This as heavy fighting continues in a strategic town in eastern Ukraine. Some 170 civilians escaped to Ukraine's capital, Kiev, on Sunday, while hundreds of vehicles were seen crossing into the Russian border. More than 5,300 people have been killed since fighting between Ukrainian forces and Russia-backed rebels began in April of last year. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
And Greece is one step closer to an all-out standoff with the Eurozone. Anti-austerity Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras says there will be no compromise on his party's pre-election pledge, rejecting Eurogroup's demand to apply for a bailout extension. In an emotional speech before his parliament on Sunday, the 40-year-old leader said Athens could not be justified in asking for an extension on a program that had so horribly failed Greece. He presented a new policy statement which greenlit a gradual minimum wage hike and a reinstatement of government employees, both of which go against existing bailout conditions. Prime Minister Tsipras also called on Germany to pay back war reparations from Berlin's 4-year occupation during World War II, including a loan taken out by the Nazi regime, which had run the country financially dry. Berlin has long rejected this demand. And finally, Jordan's Air Force chief has promised to wipe the Islamic State, quote, off the face of the earth, saying the 56 airstrikes his forces launched since Thursday was just the beginning. General Mansour al-Jabour said IS weapon depots, training centers, and military barracks were targeted in this latest round of aerial barrage. He estimated the extremist group has lost 7,000 fighters and 20% of its military capabilities since the start of the coalition airstrikes. He said Jordan was responsible for nearly 20% of the sorties to date. This as a squadron of F-16 fighter jets from the UAE arrived in Jordan with reported plans to coordinate airstrikes against IS with Amman.
Good afternoon. Seoul and the surrounding areas had a bone-chilling morning today. The low in Seoul plunged to -13 this morning, and that's about 10 degrees lower than the seasonal average. Though the highs will be much higher today, climbing up to 0 here in Seoul later this afternoon. And the skies will be clear under mostly to partly sunny skies throughout the day, but beware of dry conditions, so be sure to drink plenty of water to stay hydrated. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. So the daytime high here in Seoul will climb up to 0, while Daegu and Gwangju peak at 3 and 1, and Busan will top out at 2 this afternoon. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju Island and Daejeon should see a high of 2 and 1, and Dokdo only peaks at 0. Now it seems like temperatures will finally go back to the seasonal averages tomorrow afternoon. then it should remain on the normal range throughout the week. Well, that's all for the weather. Hope you stay warm, and back to you guys in the studio.
All right, thanks, Jaein. You know, I'm glad it's getting warmer.
Yes, slowly but surely.
All right, that does it for now. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, we'll be back at the same time on Tuesday. Stay warm and have a great start to the week. Goodbye.